Welcome back to Secrets Exposed. It's always a pleasure to have you with us. You're the reason these stories worth sharing. Tell us where you're watching from, city or country. We're amazed by how far these tales reach. To get daily new and amazing stories for you, subscribe our channel and press bell icon. All right, let's begin. The night was heavy with rain as Captain Daniel Hale stepped out of the taxi, duffel bag slung over his shoulder, uniform still carrying the dust and scent of deployment. He paused at the edge of his driveway, staring at the house he had dreamed of for months. Warm light was supposed to be spilling from the windows. He had imagined balloons taped to the porch, maybe a welcome home banner hand-painted by his daughter. He had replayed the moment in his mind on endless nights overseas. Emily's small arms around his neck, Claire's tearful smile as she whispered, "You're finally home." But the house stood in silence. No lights, no movement, just the steady drizzle pattering on the roof. Daniel frowned. Maybe they had fallen asleep. It was late after all. Still, his chest tightened. Something fell off. He walked up the steps, boots thudding softly against damp wood. As he fit his key into the lock, the air felt colder than it should. Inside, the hallway smelled stale, like dust and mildew left to gather without care. No warmth, no sign of life. "Claire," he called softly, expecting her voice from the living room. "Emily." Nothing. He set the duffel bag down gently, listening. The silence pressed against his ears, louder than gunfire had ever been. In his years of service, Daniel had learned to trust his instincts. They were screaming now. This wasn't just sleep. Something was wrong. He walked deeper into the house, his hand brushing the wall, as though steadying himself against an unseen weight. The photographs were still there. Their wedding picture, Emily at her 5th birthday, Claire holding her by the beach. Dust coated the frames. The once vibrant house looked frozen, neglected. His footsteps echoed on the wooden floor. Then he heard it. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. A cry. Daniel stopped dead in his tracks, breath catching in his throat. It wasn't the kind of cry that came from a nightmare or a scraped knee. It was thin, strained, desperate. It carried the hollow ache of someone who had been crying for far too long. "Emily." His voice trembled now. He followed the sound, each step heavy with dread. Down the hall, past the kitchen, toward the basement door. The closer he got, the clearer it became. The sobs were muffled but rising. A small, choked voice pleading. Daniel's hand hovered over the doorknob, his soldier's instincts colliding with his father's heart. The war had taught him to move cautiously, to expect danger, but nothing in combat could have prepared him for this moment. Standing in his own home, wondering why his daughter's cries were coming from beneath the floorboards. His chest burned as he forced the knob to turn. The door creaked open. A cold, damp smell rushed out. Mold, rust, something sour that didn't belong in a family home. The staircase stretched downward into shadows, only a faint flicker of light cutting through. He hesitated, gripping the railing. The sobs were clearer now. A child's voice. Fragile. Broken. "Please, it hurts." Daniel's blood ran cold. That was Emily's voice. The duffel bag sat abandoned by the front door. The dreams of a joyful reunion shattered. Instead, Daniel found himself staring into the darkness below, heart pounding with dread. He had returned from war expecting peace, but what waited for him in that basement would be the beginning of a battle he never imagined. And as he took the first step down, he realized his real war was only just beginning. Daniel's boots creaked against the wooden steps as he descended into the basement, every muscle in his body tense. The faint bulb flickered at the bottom, its weak light stretching shadows across the concrete walls. The air was colder here, damp and heavy, carrying the metallic tang of rust mixed with something sour, the kind of smell that only comes from neglect and cruelty. Halfway down, he froze. The sobs were clearer now. Small, broken gasps of breath. A child's voice murmuring between sobs, the words almost too faint to catch. "Please, please stop. I'll be good. I promise." Daniel's stomach twisted. It was Emily, his little girl. The voice he had dreamed of hearing shout, "Daddy," again, now reduced to begging whispers. He gripped the railing, forcing himself down the last few steps. His chest burned with every word he heard, but his training kept him steady. He had to see. He had to know. When his boots hit the concrete floor, his eyes adjusted to the dim light. At first, all he saw were shadows. Old boxes stacked against the wall, a broken chair, tools rusting on shelf. And then, in the far corner, under the flickering bulb, he saw her. Emily. She was curled against the wall, her knees drawn tightly to her chest. Her wrists were bound with a short chain looped through a rusted pipe, the metal biting into her skin. Her once bright hair hung in greasy strands over her pale face. Her eyes were wide, red from crying, her cheeks streaked with dirt and tears. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. The world narrowed to just her. Emily, his voice cracked, the word trembling out of him like it had carried the weight of his entire deployment. Her head jerked up. For a moment, confusion flickered in her eyes, like she thought her mind was playing tricks. Then disbelief. Then, finally, a desperate kind of hope. "Daddy," she whispered. The sound of that word shattered him. He rushed forward, dropping to his knees beside her. His hands trembled as he tried to pull at the chain, desperate to free her. "I'm here, baby. I'm here. What did they do to you?" Emily flinched at his touch, then threw herself against him, clinging to his uniform with all the strength her small body had left. She was shaking violently, her ribs pressing against his chest from how thin she had become. I thought you weren't coming back," she cried into his chest. Daniel's arms wrapped around her protectively, shielding her from the cold air, the chains, the nightmare she had been living. His jaw tightened, rage boiling inside him, but he forced his voice to stay gentle. "I promised you, Emily. I told you I'd come back. I'm here now. You're safe." But even as he said the words, he knew they weren't true. The chain held her firm. Whoever had done this was still upstairs. His soldier's instinct screamed at him. This wasn't over. "Who did this to you?" he asked softly, brushing her tangled hair from her face. Emily's lips trembled. She opened her mouth, but before she could answer, a voice cut through the basement air like a blade. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Daniel's head snapped toward the stairs. There, standing tall with a smirk on his face, was Mark, Claire's boyfriend. A leather belt dangled loosely from his hand, swinging like a snake ready to strike. His bare chest glistened with sweat, his posture relaxed, as if he owned the place. Daniel's muscles tightened, his heart pounding with fury. Mark leaned against the railing casually, his eyes gleaming with arrogance. "She's learning to obey." The words echoed through the basement, venomous and deliberate. Emily whimpered, burying her face into her father's chest. Daniel's breath turned sharp. His hands curled into fists, every part of him ready to launch forward and tear the man apart. But Emily's trembling body anchored him. If he lost control now, Mark had hurt her before he even reached the stairs. The soldier in him screamed for restraint. The father in him burned for vengeance. He slowly rose to his feet, shielding Emily behind him, his eyes locked on Mark's smirk. The reunion he had dreamed of was shattered. His homecoming was no longer about peace or rest or family. It was a battlefield, and his daughter was the one who had been captured. The basement air grew heavier with every passing second. Daniel stood protectively in front of Emily, his body a shield, his soldier's instincts on high alert. Mark hadn't moved from the top of the stairs, but the smirk on his face made Daniel's blood boil. The belt in his hand swung lazily, as if mocking Daniel with every sway. "Step away from her," Daniel growled, his voice low and dangerous. Mark chuckled, taking a step down. "Relax, Captain. No need to get dramatic. She was disobedient, that's all. Someone had to teach her some discipline while you were off playing hero." Daniel's jaw tightened. Discipline? His daughter was chained like a prisoner, her small wrists bruised from metal biting into her skin, her eyes hollow from hunger and fear. This wasn't discipline. This was cruelty. He took one step forward, his boots scraping against the concrete. Emily clung to the back of his uniform, her little hands trembling. "Unchain her." "Now," Daniel commanded. Mark tilted his head, amusement flashing in his eyes. "Funny, you think you're still in charge here." He tapped the belt against the railing. You don't get it, do you? This is my house now. Your wife understood that long ago. Daniel's breath hitched. Your wife. The words sliced deeper than the belt ever could. And then a voice drifted down from the shadows of the stairwell. Calm, cold, detached. He's right, Daniel. Daniel's eyes snapped upward. Claire. She stepped into view, her expression unreadable, her arms folded across her chest. She wasn't crying. She wasn't shocked. She wasn't even ashamed. Her face was calm, like she had been waiting for this confrontation. You were gone too long, she said simply. You left us. Mark kept this family together. Daniel stared at her, his mind reeling. Kept this family together? By chaining our daughter in the basement? By starving her? Claire's eyes flicked to Emily, then back to Daniel. Her voice was eerily steady. She needed structure. She was weak, spoiled. Mark gave her discipline. Emily whimpered behind Daniel, pressing her face into his back. Mom, please. Hearing his daughter's broken plea shattered something inside him. Daniel turned his gaze back to Claire, searching for even a flicker of the woman he had married. The woman who once cradled Emily as a baby, who kissed him goodbye before deployment. But all he saw now was cold attachment. Claire, he said, his voice trembling with a mix of fury and disbelief. You let this happen? Claire's lips pressed into a thin line. You think being a soldier makes you a father? You left us for war. Mark stayed. He took responsibility. Daniel's hands curled into fists, his knuckles white. He wanted to tear Mark apart, to shake Claire until she remembered the daughter crying behind him. But Emily's small hand gripped tighter at his shirt, grounding him. He couldn't let rage cloud his judgment. Not with Emily still chained, still vulnerable. He drew a slow breath, forcing calm into his tone. Emily is coming with me. You're not going to touch her again. Either of you. Mark laughed, a cruel, mocking sound. And how exactly do you plan to do that, Captain? You think you could just walk her out of here? Not without my say-so. He descended another step, the belt tightening in his fist. The sound of leather pulling taut echoed through the basement. Daniel's eyes narrowed. His stance shifted slightly, shoulders squared, weight balanced. Years of training surged back into him. But unlike the battlefield, this wasn't just about survival. This was about his daughter. Emily's voice broke through the tension, small and terrified. Daddy, please don't let him take me. Daniel clenched his jaw, his decision made. You'll never touch her again, he said, his voice like steel. Mark smirked. Big words. Let's see if you can back them up. For a moment, the world went still. Daniel standing guard over his daughter. Mark poised with his belt, Claire watching from the shadows above like a judge passing silent judgment. The homecoming Daniel had dreamed of was gone. In its place stood a battlefield unlike any he had fought before. And this time, losing wasn't an option. The belt dangled from Mark's hand, the leather catching the faint light of the basement bulb as he slowly rolled it tighter between his fingers. The sound of it stretching was sharp, deliberate, meant to intimidate. Daniel's eyes never left the weapon. Every instinct in him screamed to strike first, to end this now, but Emily's trembling grip on the back of his uniform kept him grounded. He couldn't risk it. Not yet. Mark smirked as he descended another step, his posture relaxed, but his eyes alive with malice. You think you scare me? I've been running this house for months. Claire knows it. Emily knows it. And now, you'll know it too. Daniel's jaw tightened, his chest burning. He had stared down insurgents with rifles, had faced ambushes in the dead of night, but this smirking man with a belt in his hand, standing in his home above his chained daughter, was the most dangerous enemy he had ever faced. Unchain her, Daniel demanded again, his voice steady but ice cold. Now, Mark tilted his head, chuckling under his breath. Or what? You'll hit me? In front of her? You think that'll make you a better father than me? Emily whimpered, burying her face against her father's back. Her voice cracked as she whispered, Daddy, don't let him. Daniel reached back slightly, his fingers brushing her arm in reassurance. I won't, sweetheart. I promise. Mark's laughter echoed through the basement, low and cruel. He slapped the belt against the railing, the crack of leather reverberating like a gunshot. Emily flinched. Claire didn't. She stood in the shadows above, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. See how she jumps? Mark sneered. That's obedience. Something you never taught her. Daniel's nostrils flared, his muscles coiled. His training screamed at him to act, strike fast, strike hard. But he forced himself to think. Mark wanted him angry, wanted him reckless. If Daniel lunged now, Mark could lash out at Emily before Daniel reached him. He had to play this smart. Slowly, Daniel raised his hands, palms open. His voice softened, steady, controlled. All right, let's not do this here. You want to talk? Let's talk upstairs. Mark paused, suspicion flickering in his eyes. Daniel kept going, his tone calculated. You're right. I've been gone. I don't know what's been happening here. So explain it. Face to face. Upstairs. Away from her. He nodded toward Emily. She's scared enough as it is. For the first time, Mark hesitated. He wasn't afraid of Daniel. His smirk proved that. But his ego craved validation, craved an audience. Claire stepped forward, her voice low. Mark. Mark shot her a glance, then grinned. Fine. Let's talk like men. He tossed the belt onto the steps with a casual flick, letting it rest where both men could see it. Then he motioned upward. After you, Captain. Daniel's eyes flickered to the belt, memorizing its position, then back to Mark. He gave a slow nod, then turned and guided Emily gently toward the wall. Stay here, sweetheart. Don't move. I'll be right back. Emily's eyes widened in fear. She shook her head violently, clutching his sleeve. No, Daddy, don't leave me. Daniel crouched, pressing his forehead gently against hers. Listen to me. I'm not leaving you. I'm just going upstairs to fix this. Look at me. You're safe. You hear me? Tears streamed down her cheeks, but she nodded weakly. Daniel stood, his body rigid, and began ascending the stairs. Each creak of wood beneath his boots echoed like a drumbeat. His heart pounded, not from fear, but from rage restrained by sheer will. Behind him, Emily whimpered softly. In front of him, Mark followed, smug and careless, confident he still held control. But Daniel's eyes weren't on Mark. As he reached the top of the stairs, his gaze caught something unexpected, a faint red blink under the kitchen counter. A small, steady pulse of light. Daniel froze for half a second, his soldier's instinct kicking in. That wasn't random. That was surveillance. And in that instant, he realized this wasn't just cruelty. It was something far worse. Daniel's boots hit the main floor with a heavy thud, his senses sharp. The blinking red light beneath the counter pulsed like a warning. He didn't look at it directly, not yet. He needed Mark and Claire unaware that he had noticed. Mark followed behind, smug as ever, shoulders loose, confidence radiating from every step. Claire stood in the kitchen now, arms folded, leaning against the counter with a cold stillness in her eyes. She looked at Daniel not as a husband returning home, but as an intruder. Finally, she said, her tone flat. You're not shouting now. Daniel straightened his posture, keeping his face unreadable. I don't need to shout. I want answers. Mark snorted, grabbing a bottle of water from the counter as though he owned the place. Answers? You were gone for a year. What did you expect to come back to? A faithful wife waiting at the door? A kid who respects you just because you send letters and medals? Daniel's fists clenched at his sides, but he didn't move. Respect doesn't come from chains in a basement. That's not discipline. That's abuse. Claire's lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. You don't get it. Emily was falling apart while you were away. Acting out, refusing to listen, crying for you every night. She needed structure. Mark gave her that. Daniel turned slowly to her, disbelief cutting through his anger. Structure? You call starving our daughter and chaining her to a pipe structure. Her eyes flicked away for the briefest moment. Not guilt, but calculation. Then she met his gaze again, steady and unflinching. You weren't here, Daniel. We had to survive without you. Mark stepped up. Daniel's chest tightened. He had faced betrayal in war before. Men he thought were allies turning against him. But this, from his wife, cut deeper than any battlefield wound. He took a slow step closer, his voice low. You let him do this. You watched him do this. For a moment, something flickered across Claire's face. Not shame, not regret, just irritation. Emily is weak, she said coldly. You always spoiled her. Mark's been making her strong. Daniel's eyes narrowed. The faint red blink under the counter pulsed again, catching his peripheral vision. He shifted slightly, angling his body to block his line of sight from Mark. His soldier's instincts pieced it together. The neglect, the strange detachment in Claire's voice, the arrogance in Mark's tone. This wasn't just about control. Something more sinister was at play. But he couldn't confront it yet. Not without confirmation. Mark leaned casually against the table, cracking open the water bottle. She listens now. That's what matters. She obeys. She doesn't cry for you anymore. Daniel's chest burned, rage threatening to consume him. He pictured Emily's wide eyes, her small body shaking against him. And now, hearing that her cries had been silenced not by love, but by fear, it made his hands tremble. Still, he kept his voice calm, measured, deliberate. If this is what you call a family, he said slowly, then you've both forgotten what the word means. Claire tilted her head, studying him like a stranger. No, Daniel. You forgot. The day you chose war over us. Her words struck with surgical precision, but Daniel didn't flinch. He had expected guilt. Instead, he felt clarity. The woman standing in front of him wasn't the wife he had left behind. She was someone else now. Someone who had chosen cruelty and control over love. Emily's muffled sobs echoed faintly from the basement below, a haunting reminder of what was at stake. Daniel forced himself still, his mind working like it did on missions. Patience, timing, precision. He couldn't win this war with rage. He needed proof. He needed the right moment. His eyes flickered once more to the blinking red light. Whatever it was the key. And he swore silently. When the truth came out, Claire and Mark would regret underestimating the man who had survived battlefields they couldn't even imagine. Daniel stood in the kitchen, face to face with Claire, while Mark lingered like a predator circling its prey. The tension in the room was suffocating, every breath sharp with unspoken violence. Emily's faint sobs drifted up from the basement, each one striking Daniel's chest like a hammer. He wanted to explode. Every part of him screamed to end this, to grab the belt, to slam Mark into the wall, to make Claire see what she had done. But one glance at that blinking red light under the counter told him he couldn't. Not yet. Someone was watching or recording. Acting now would risk everything. So he did what he had learned on the battlefield. He restrained himself. Slowly, he unclenched his fists and stepped back, his tone cooling into something almost measured. You're right, he said, forcing the words out. Maybe I don't know what's been happening here. Maybe I judged too fast. Mark arched a brow, clearly enjoying the shift. Finally, the soldier admits he doesn't have all the answers. Claire's lips curved faintly, but her eyes stayed cold. She didn't buy his calmness completely, but she didn't challenge it either. Daniel continued, steady as stone. If Emily really needed this discipline, then I need to understand. I want to understand. But we can't do that while she's crying downstairs. He gestured lightly toward the basement. Let's talk. Just us. Man to man. Husband and wife. Mark smirked, twisting the cap off his water bottle and taking a swig. Now you're making sense. Daniel nodded slowly, every motion deliberate, as though yielding control. Inside, his rage clawed at him, but his mind was calculating, scanning every angle, every detail. He glanced again toward the counter. Not directly at the blinking light, but enough to keep it marked in his memory. Good, Mark said, setting the bottle down with a loud clink. Because here's the truth, Captain. You left. Claire moved on. And Emily? She belongs to us now. The words sliced through Daniel, but he didn't let his expression crack. Belongs, he repeated quietly. Claire shifted, her arms still crossed, her chin raised. She has a roof. Food. Rules. Things she wouldn't have if we waited around for your military paycheck. Daniel's jaw clenched. He had sent money every month. He had written letters. He had carried their photos into battle. And now, to hear his wife twist his absence into abandonment, while his daughter starved in chains below, it was almost unbearable. But Emily's voice echoed in his memory. Daddy, don't leave me again. That was what mattered. Keeping her safe. So he swallowed his rage and stayed calm. You're saying she's safer with you? Daniel asked softly, almost curious. Mark leaned forward, smirking. Exactly. She's learning. And the best part? She doesn't even cry for you anymore. She knows who's in charge. Daniel's chest tightened. His soldier's instincts sharpened. Every word Mark spoke revealed more. The arrogance, the certainty, the way Claire didn't flinch, it all hinted at something bigger. Something they thought they had hidden. He forced a nod, as if conceding. Then explain it to me, he said. Show me how you keep her safe. For the first time, Claire's expression shifted. A flicker, quick but there. Not fear, not guilt, but calculation. Like a player caught before revealing too much of their hand. Mark didn't notice. He chuckled, leaning back in the chair. Maybe later. For now, you need to understand one thing. You don't make the rules here anymore. Daniel studied him, his voice steady but edged with quiet steel. We'll see about that. The room fell silent. Only the faint sobs from below and the rhythmic blink of the hidden red light broke the stillness. Daniel kept his face controlled, his breathing even. But inside, his resolve was carved in stone. He would uncover everything. The reason for the cameras, the truth behind Claire's coldness, the real hold Mark thought he had. And when the time came, he would strike. Not as a soldier following orders. Not as a husband betrayed, but as a father who refused to lose his child. The kitchen was dim, only the yellow glow of a single overhead bulb casting shadows across the counters. Daniel sat stiffly at the table, his back straight, his palms resting flat against the cool wood. Across from him, Mark leaned back in the chair like he owned the place, his legs spread, the water bottle dangling from his fingers. Claire stood at the counter, arms still folded, watching them both like a referee waiting to declare a winner. The faint blinking red light pulsed again beneath the counter, drawing Daniel's eyes for just a fraction of a second. He forced himself to stay calm, to pretend he hadn't noticed. His instincts screamed louder now. This wasn't just abuse. There was surveillance, documentation, a reason they felt so untouchable. Mark smirked, tapping his finger on the table. So, Captain, let's settle this. You want back in this family? Then you follow the rules. My rules. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he stayed composed. And those rules are... Mark leaned forward, his grin widening. You don't question how I run this house. You don't interfere with Emily's training. You don't pretend you're the father when you've been gone so long. You're a guest now. If you can accept that, maybe we'll let you stay. The word guest made Daniel's blood boil. His own daughter was locked in the basement, and this man had the audacity to call him a guest in his own home. Still, Daniel kept his expression unreadable, every line of his face controlled. And Claire, Daniel asked quietly, turning to her, you agree with this? Claire's gaze was steady, her lips pressed thin. You left me alone, Daniel. Do you know what it was like? Nights without a husband, bills piling up, a child who wouldn't stop crying for her father? Mark gave me strength. He gave me order. Her voice was cold, but Daniel heard something else beneath it. Not regret, but justification. Like she needed to believe her own story. Daniel let the silence stretch, studying them both. Mark with his arrogance, Claire with her practiced detachment. And then, softly, he said, you're hiding something. Mark's grin faltered for the first time. What? Daniel's eyes narrowed, his voice steady. You're too confident. Too sure I can't touch you. People who do what you've done, they don't act like that unless they're protected. Unless they've got insurance. The kitchen grew still. Claire's eyes flickered for a fraction of a second toward the counter. Mark noticed, his jaw tightening before he forced the smirk back onto his face. You think you're clever, Captain, he said, his tone sharper now. But you don't know a damn thing. Daniel leaned forward, his voice dropping low. Then enlighten me. Mark's fingers drummed against the table. His arrogance was cracking, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. All you need to know is this. Emily isn't your daughter anymore. She's ours, and she's more valuable than you realize. Daniel's stomach twisted. The word valuable hit differently. Not just as a child, not just as control. Something darker. Something transactional. Claire finally spoke, her voice calm but sharp. Daniel, stop fighting this. Accept it, or you'll lose her forever. Daniel's hands curled into fists under the table, hidden from their view. His breathing slowed, steady like it did before an ambush. He knew now. The cameras weren't just paranoia. They were part of something bigger, something vile. But if he showed his hand too soon, Emily would pay the price. So he leaned back slowly, unclenching his fists, letting his shoulders ease just enough to sell the lie. "All right," he said softly. "I hear you." Mark smirked again, arrogance restored. "That's more like it." But Daniel's eyes drifted once more to that faint blinking light under the counter. He didn't just hear them. He understood them. And when the time came, he would burn their entire scheme to the ground. The moment Mark left the kitchen to grab another drink from the fridge, Daniel seized his chance. He shifted in his chair, angling his body so Claire's view was blocked. His eyes locked on the counter, on that faint pulsing light. One slow breath steadied him before he crouched slightly, his hand brushing the underside of the wood. Cold plastic, wires, a lens, a camera. His chest constricted. This wasn't just paranoia. The house was wired. Every tear Emily shed, every whimper, every time Mark raised that belt, it was all recorded. His jaw clenched as realization struck harder. This wasn't just abuse. It was content. Someone was meant to watch. Behind him, the fridge door closed with a thud. Daniel straightened quickly, masking the tension in his face. Mark sauntered back with a beer, oblivious. Claire leaned against the sink, her gaze fixed on Daniel, as though daring him to show what he had learned. He didn't. Not yet. "Where were we?" Mark asked casually, cracking open the can. "Ah, right. The part where you admit you've lost." Daniel forced his hands to relax on the table. "You said Emily's valuable," he replied carefully, choosing each word. "What did you mean?" Mark grinned, taking a long sip. "You'll find out. Maybe sooner than you want." Claire's lips pressed into a thin smile. "It's better if you don't ask, Daniel. You wouldn't understand." Daniel's pulse pounded in his ears. Oh, he understood. He had seen enough in war zones. Captured footage, black markets, people reduced to products. Now, the horror had invaded his own home. Emily's cries still floated faintly from below, cutting through his thoughts like broken glass. He leaned forward slightly, locking eyes with Claire. "You let this happen. To our daughter. You helped him." Her expression didn't flinch. "I did what needed to be done, and I won't apologize." Mark chuckled, pointing his beer at Daniel. "See? That's why I like her. Strong. Knows how the world works. Unlike you, still thinking it's about right and wrong." Daniel's nails dug into his palms under the table. He could almost feel the weight of his service weapon, except it wasn't here. All he had was his mind, his patience, and the promise he had made to Emily. Stay calm. Stay smart. Strike when it counts. He scanned the kitchen discreetly. If there was one camera, there were more. Every word, every movement likely captured. Someone, somewhere, might even be watching live. He couldn't risk tipping them off. So he exhaled slowly, softening his tone. "Fine. If that's how it is, then teach me. Show me how you keep her in line. How you make her valuable." Mark's grin widened, pride flickering in his eyes. "Maybe I will. Maybe you'll see she's better off this way." Claire's expression flickered again. Not guilt, not fear, but calculation. She was weighing Daniel's words, trying to decide if his sudden compliance was real. Daniel met her gaze evenly, never blinking. Let her think he was breaking. Let her believe he was folding into their twisted order. Because beneath the mask, his rage was sharpening into something lethal. Emily wasn't just chained. She was being used. And when he tore the truth into the open, he wouldn't just save her. He'd destroy everything Mark and Claire had built on her suffering. Mark leaned back in his chair, the open beer can resting on the table, foam dripping lazily down the side. He looked too comfortable, too untouchable, like a man convinced the world bent to his will. Claire stayed near the sink, arms folded, her eyes fixed on Daniel, gauging every twitch of his face. Daniel kept his posture still, measured, controlled. Inside, though, his chest burned. The faint blinking camera under the counter had confirmed what his gut already knew. This wasn't just cruelty. It was performance, exploitation, and the man smirking across the table was proud of it. "You know what your problem is, Captain?" Mark said, his grin spreading. "You think being gone makes you some kind of martyr. But out there," he gestured toward the front door with a careless wave. Nobody cares. Here, you're nothing. You're late to your own family. I stepped up where you failed. Daniel's voice stayed calm, deliberate. Chaining a child is stepping up? Mark shrugged, sipping his beer. Don't act like you don't see the results. She doesn't cry for you anymore. She doesn't even look at you the way she used to. You've been replaced. And she knows it. The word stabbed, but Daniel didn't flinch. Emily's face in the basement flashed in his mind. Pale, trembling, eyes wide with hope the moment she saw him. Replaced? Never. Still, he leaned back slightly, pretending to concede. Maybe you're right, he said quietly. Maybe I was gone too long. Maybe I don't know her anymore. Mark smirked, mistaking restraint for defeat. Exactly. You're starting to understand. Daniel tilted his head, his eyes narrowing just slightly. But you said she's valuable. What did you mean by that? The smirk widened. Mark enjoyed being asked. His ego swelled with every word. Let's just say people like what they see, Mark said, tapping the side of his beer. They pay for it. And Claire and I, we don't mind collecting. Daniel's stomach churned, but his face betrayed nothing. Claire shifted, shooting Mark a quick look, sharp and warning. Mark, she muttered. But Mark waved her off, drunk on his own arrogance. What? You should know. He's the big soldier. Surely he's seen worse overseas. He can handle the truth. Daniel's fingers curled slowly under the table, digging into the wood. The truth. The word burned. Emily wasn't just being broken for control. She was being sold. Watched. Consumed. Claire's voice cut through, sharper this time. Enough. But Mark leaned forward, his grin feral. No. Let him stew in it. Let him realize his little girl doesn't belong to him anymore. She belongs to us. To the ones who pay. And you know what? She's never going back to who she was. She's broken now. Perfect. The world seemed to still. Daniel's pulse roared in his ears, but his face stayed calm, unreadable. That's where you're wrong, Daniel said softly, his voice cold steel. Mark laughed, slamming the beer can down. Foam sprayed across the table. Am I? She begged me to stop crying your name. And now? She doesn't even whisper it. She's mine. Claire shifted uneasily at the words, but didn't intervene. Her silence was enough. She agreed. Daniel leaned forward, his eyes locked on Mark's. You think she's yours. You think you've broken her. But you've forgotten one thing. Mark arched a brow, amused. And what's that? Daniel's voice dropped lower, steady and sharp. She still called me Daddy when she saw me. Not you. For a fraction of a second, the smirk faltered. Just a flicker. But Daniel caught it. Silence settled in the kitchen, thick and suffocating. Claire's expression tightened. Mark's jaw clenched, and Daniel sat there, still as stone, the truth burning in his chest. Mark leaned back again, forcing the smirk to return. Enjoy it while it lasts, Captain, because the moment you step out of line, she'll pay the price. And trust me, she'll break for good. Daniel didn't move, didn't speak, didn't show the storm raging inside. But in that moment, his resolve crystallized into something unshakable. Mark thought he was untouchable. Claire thought she was untouchable. They were wrong. And Daniel knew the war inside his home was about to explode. The kitchen air was thick, the silence stretched so tight it felt like it could snap at any moment. Daniel sat motionless, his eyes locked on Mark's smug grin, but inside he was a storm. Every word Mark had spoken still rang in his ears. She's mine. She's broken. She's perfect. The faint sound of Emily's sobs from the basement reached him again, fragile and desperate. That was the spark, the one sound that ripped through the chains of restraint he'd wrapped around himself. Daniel moved. It wasn't a wild lunge. It was precise, controlled. Years of training condensed into a single strike. His hand shot forward, snatching the belt Mark had carelessly left draped across the chair beside him. In one swift motion, he looped it around Mark's wrist and yanked. The smug grin vanished as Mark's body slammed against the table, the beer can tipping and spilling foam across the wood. He roared in shock, trying to pull back, but Daniel's grip was iron. You touch her again, Daniel growled, his voice a low snarl, and I'll break every bone in your body. Mark struggled, veins straining in his neck. You think you can stop me? Daniel yanked the belt tighter, twisting it until Mark's arm bent unnaturally against the edge of the table. The crack of bone filled the kitchen, sharp and sickening. Mark screamed, collapsing halfway over the table, his arrogance gone in an instant. Claire gasped, stepping forward. Daniel, stop! Daniel turned his gaze to her, eyes blazing. You watched. You let him chain her. You let him starve her. You don't get to tell me to stop. Claire froze, her face pale. For the first time, her calm facade cracked. Mark writhed, clutching his arm as Daniel released the belt. He crumpled to the floor, cursing through gritted teeth. Daniel loomed over him, his chest heaving with barely contained fury. You wanted me to play guest in my own home, Daniel said, voice steady but deadly. But this is my house, my daughter, and you'll never own her. Mark tried a lunge, but Daniel's boot pinned him to the ground with brutal force. Another scream tore from his throat. Claire's voice wavered now, panic creeping in. Daniel, listen. You don't understand. Daniel's head snapped toward her. Then make me understand. Right now. Her lips trembled. For the first time, her mask slipped, and Daniel saw fear. Not just of him, but of what might come next. You don't know who's watching, she whispered. Daniel's pulse pounded. The cameras. The blinking red light. Every moment had been recorded. Mark coughed through his pain, his voice dripping venom. They've already seen her cry for you. They've seen everything. Even this. You can't stop it. Daniel crouched, grabbing Mark by the collar and dragging his face close. His voice was ice. Watch me. Then, with one brutal punch, he knocked the man unconscious. Mark collapsed to the floor, limp and groaning. Claire backed against the counter, her hands trembling now. The woman who once stood cold and unshaken finally looked small. Daniel straightened, his chest heaving, and stepped toward her. You're going to tell me everything, he said, his voice like steel. Every name, every camera, every sick thing you've let happen in this house. Because when this ends, Emily is walking out with me. And nothing, not you, not him, not whoever is watching, will stop that. Claire's face drained of color. She opened her mouth, but no words came. From below, Emily's voice broke through again, small and pleading. Daddy! Daniel turned, the sound cutting through the chaos like a blade. His rage cooled just enough to remind him of his mission. Emily first. Answers later. He strode to the basement door, his hand firm on the handle, ready to free her once and for all. Behind him, Mark groaned, still unconscious on the floor. Claire stood frozen, torn between fear and defiance. But Daniel didn't look back. His daughter needed him, and no war, not the one overseas, not the one in this house, mattered more than that. Daniel stood at the basement door, hand on the knob, when the distant wail of sirens cut through the night. The sound grew louder with every passing second, flashing blue and red lights, now bleeding faintly through the living room curtains. Mark stirred on the floor, groaning, clutching his broken arm. His arrogance was gone, replaced by whimpers and curses under his breath. Claire's face drained of color as the sirens drew closer. Her voice cracked for the first time, sharp with panic. You called them? Daniel didn't even turn to her. His voice was low, steady, unshaken. I'm a soldier. We're trained for emergencies. I hit my panic alert before I walked in. Claire's lips parted in disbelief, her composure shattering. For months she had thought she and Mark were untouchable, shielded by the hidden cameras, the secrecy, the false power. But now, the law was pulling up right outside the door. Daniel pulled the basement door open. Cold air and damp shadows rushed up to meet him. He took the steps two at a time, his boots pounding until he reached the bottom. Emily, he whispered, dropping to his knees. She blinked through tears, weak but alive, her small hands still bound by chain. When she saw him, hope flickered again. Daddy! Daniel's throat tightened. He pulled a multi-tool from his uniform pocket, the kind he carried even off duty. The blade sawed through the rusted lock, sparks of metal scraping in the silence. With one final snap, the lock gave way. Emily collapsed into his arms, clinging to him as though she would never let go again. Her voice trembled into his chest. I knew you'd come back. I knew it. He pressed his forehead against hers, fighting back the burn in his eyes. I promised you, baby. I promised. Upstairs, The pounding of fists rattled the front door. Police! Open up! Claire stumbled forward, her voice rising in desperation. Wait! Please! Don't tell them everything. Daniel, you don't understand. Daniel carried Emily up the stairs, his daughter's frail arms wrapped tight around his neck. He pushed the basement door open and stepped back into the kitchen. Claire froze, her body trembling, torn between running and pleading. Mark groaned louder, dragging himself against the wall, his eyes wild with pain and fury. We're gonna ruin everything. Daniel silenced him with a glare. No, you ruined everything. The pounding at the door grew harder. Police! Last warning. Daniel adjusted Emily in his arms, her head resting against his shoulder. He strode across the living room, his boots deliberate, each step heavy with resolve. He unlocked the door and pulled it open. The blast of night air swept in with a blinding flash of lights. Two officers surged forward, weapons drawn, eyes darting across the scene. Sir, are you the one who called? One demanded. Daniel's voice was calm, even as Emily clung tighter. Yes, the child is the victim. The two behind me, they're responsible. The officers stormed past him. Shouts filled the house. Claire cried out as her wrists were wrenched behind her, the cold click of handcuffs snapping shut. Mark screamed curses as they pinned him down, his broken arm barely able to resist. Emily buried her face in Daniel's shoulder, trembling. He whispered softly, rubbing her back. It's over. You're safe now. Claire's voice shrieked from behind, desperate, unrecognizable. Daniel, please. I had no choice. You weren't here. You don't know what they would have done to us if we didn't. Daniel turned, his eyes burning into her. You chose this. You let him touch her. You chained your own daughter. Don't you dare say it was for survival. Claire's knees buckled as they dragged her out, her pleas lost beneath the roar of the sirens. Mark was hauled behind her, cursing until a blow from a baton silenced him. The flashing lights lit the walls of the house, turning it into a battlefield of color. Daniel stood in the doorway, Emily in his arms, her small fingers clutching his collar like a lifeline. The officer nearest him lowered his weapon, his tone softer now. We'll take it from here, sir. You did the right thing. Daniel nodded faintly, his voice quiet but firm. I should have been here sooner. Emily shook her head against his chest, whispering through tears. You came back. That's all that matters. Daniel closed his eyes, pressing his cheek to the top of her head. The war overseas was behind him, but this was the fight that mattered most. And tonight he had one. The night air outside the Hale house was heavy with flashing lights, radios crackling, and officers moving with practiced efficiency. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains and door frames, their whispers carried by the wind. But Daniel heard none of it. All his senses were on Emily, her fragile weight pressed against his chest, her trembling slowing as she clung to him. An officer offered a blanket. Daniel knelt, wrapping it gently around her thin shoulders. She looked small inside it, her face pale, her eyes swollen from tears. Yet beneath the fear was something else, trust. She stared up at him as if he were the only steady ground left in the world. You're safe now, Daniel whispered, brushing a strand of hair from her face. No one will ever hurt you again. Emily's lip quivered. You won't leave, right? The words pierced deeper than any battlefield wound. He pulled her tighter, his voice breaking. Never. Not again. Behind them, Claire was shoved into the back of a squad car, her wrists bound in cuffs. Her eyes darted wildly, no longer cold, no longer controlled. She screamed through the open window, her voice desperate, shrill. Daniel, you don't understand. They made me do it. If I refused, they would have come after me too. Daniel turned his head slowly, his jaw tight. You chose him over her. You chose money over your daughter. That's all I need to understand. The door slammed, silencing her cries. On the ground nearby, Mark was loaded into another car, still groaning from his broken arm, spitting curses between shallow breaths. His arrogance was gone, his power stripped away. For the first time, he looked small, pathetic. Daniel didn't spare him another glance. An officer approached, clipboard in hand. Sir, we'll need your statement. But I just want to say, the way you kept calm in there, the way you protected her, that little girl is alive tonight because of you. Daniel nodded faintly, but his gaze never left Emily. She's the only mission that matters. The officer gave a respectful nod and stepped back. Emily shivered beneath the blanket. Daniel lifted her again, her head resting against his shoulder. She was so light, too light. He thought of all the meals she had missed, all the nights she had slept on concrete, all the moments of fear she had endured, and his chest ached with guilt. I should have been here sooner, he murmured, more to himself than to her. Emily stirred, her voice small but steady. But you came back. That's all that matters. Tears stung his eyes, but he held her tighter, letting her words bury into his heart. The flashing lights painted the night sky red and blue, a twisted reminder of the battlefield he had just survived. But unlike the war overseas, this fight had been personal, intimate, and the stakes had been everything. As the officers prepared to drive away with Claire and Mark, Daniel stood at the edge of the driveway, Emily still in his arms. He watched the cars disappear into the night, sirens fading until only silence remained. For the first time in months, he let himself breathe. He looked down at Emily, who had finally closed her eyes, exhaustion overtaking fear. Her small breaths warmed his chest, her arms still clinging as if afraid he might vanish again. Daniel whispered into her hair, his voice steady, a vow etched in stone. You'll never be alone again. Not while I'm here. This war is over. The house behind them stood dark and hollow, no longer a home, but a graveyard of betrayal. Daniel turned his back on it, walking toward the waiting patrol car that would take him and Emily to safety. The soldier who had fought battles across the world had just fought the most important war of his life. And this time, he had won.